Thank you very much. My name is Anthony Phipps, and I'll start with a little bit about myself. I started in electrical and electronic engineering way back in the 1980s, so I'm officially old. From the late 1990s, I specialised in cybersecurity and physical security in the energy and nuclear sectors. But then in 2014, I joined Lloyd's Banking Group, where I'm currently a security consultancy and design lead, which means that I manage a team of very clever people who do threat modelling rather than do it myself normally. However, today I'm here to talk about or tell the story of my research interest, which is cybersecurity and how that impacts digital accessibility. So here's a quick summary of the research. The idea was to use audio steganography in an authentication scenario, that is, hiding secret keys within sound. The challenge is that there's no off-the-shelf library for audio-based systems. So the approach I took was to carry out literature research, creating data flow diagrams using the Microsoft threat modeling tool, leveraged the MITRE attack framework, created a series of attack trees to categorize the threats, and then I used slide pages for refinement of the threat models, but crucially to design my experiments into audio steganography. And the outcome of all of that was a model for developing audio authentication systems. So, the motivation for this research is to help people with accessibility challenges. In the UK, digital accessibility is a real problem for those with physical and sensory impairment. 19% of the population struggle to perform foundation tasks such as online shopping and online banking. Further, 9% of the population can't use the traditional IT controls such as keyboards, mice and touchscreens. Now, security controls of voice computing are poor performing when compared to the alternatives, despite offering greater convenience and accessibility. So the inspiration for the study was a paper I read a few years ago about a theoretical law enforcement scheme used to de-anonymise cyber criminals on the dark web. Basically, law enforcement would create a watering hole style site on the dark web. Cyber criminals would then visit that site, and a hidden script would run which would force the emanation of an ultrasonic sound. That sound would then be captured by a wiretap or from the user's mobile device, which is that blank picture there, I don't know why it's blank. And that would alert the authorities that the cyber criminals had actually visited the site, giving their location and the fact that they were up to no good. Now, because there was no user interaction required for that, I thought to myself, that is potentially a scheme that could help with authenticating users with accessibility challenges. So, as I said, I started out with literature research, and I quickly found out that most voice journeys are unauthenticated. And when they are authenticated in channel, they often use voice biometrics, and voice biometrics perform poorly when compared to other authentication methods. Also, homeworking since the pandemic has added exposure to things like ambient device activation. But from all the research, the key threats I identified were massive increase in deepfakes and voice impersonation, malicious voice apps, voice spotting and fake skills, covert attacks using things like light sources and ultra and infrasonic sounds, replay attacks using captured or recorded audio, and brute force attacks using adversarial voice commands and voice synthesis. And of course these systems are vulnerable to traditional software exploits as well. So I needed somewhere to start with a design, and voice systems do differ incredibly in architecture, whether they're voice assistants, TVs, cars, but they all share common elements and vulnerabilities. So a great place to start was the W3C voice interaction architecture, which has three layers: a client layer, a dialogue layer, and an API data layer. So I then mapped those using the Microsoft threat modeling tool, just to map out the trust boundaries, define the key assets, components, data flows, and services, and that gave me my initial threat model. But as I said at the start, there's no big off-the-shelf library of audio-based threats, but there are a couple in the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So that was a good place to start, and it had many of the traditional tools, tactics and procedures used by cyber adversaries, which was a great start. And then to support the modelling further, I created a series of taxonomies, which were visual attack trees with the root node defined by the attacker's objective. And the focus here was on categorisation at this point, with mitigations added later in the process. Now I managed to squeeze all of the search threats into 4 key categories: malicious commands, false authentication, denial of service, and information stealing. So, as I said, this was an iterative process, and experimentation was used each time to refine the model. So I would carry out a series of experiments with different steganography techniques, and then I would collate the results from that and create stride-based tables that included the mitigations and the threats. And the refinement was guided by 4 questions, which was to make sure all the search threats were included, making sure that there was a proposed mitigation for each of the threats, assessing whether each threat had a realistic probability of being an attack vector, and then making sure that all the vulnerabilities and controls that I devised were mapped across all the system layers, especially the audio-related ones. So in summary, I used a hybrid threat modelling approach, which basically borrowed from a number of frameworks, developed due to the lack of coverage of audio-based threats in the tools at the time. I started out with the W3C voice system architecture, which was a great starting point. I then researched emerging threats, attack scenarios, and used the MITRE TTPs to then build a model with data flow diagrams, attack taxonomies, and carried out stride analysis. I then used all of the findings from that to refine my design and guide my experiments. And then I used the results from the experiments to refine the threat model further to give me my overall final design. And I guess the future opportunity is to integrate those audio-based threats into modern threat modeling tools, or in fact the OWASP threat model library that's just recently been announced. I'd like to thank you for your time. Do you have any questions?
What would be a mitigation against such threats? Like a steganography threat, what would be a good mitigation against that?
Yeah, so because I was actually using steganography as a tool, I was basically started out, for example, hiding RSA key within sound and using that as an authentication. So mitigation, if you're on the other side, if you like, is steg analysis. So you can use whether it's using statistical analysis to see if there's something amiss with the sound, or if you have reference sounds, comparing that to the sound that has the stego object in it.
Thank you.
Any more for anyone? Yep.
Thank you for that. Probably a side question. I'm just interested in whether the steganography would cope with compression algorithms, MP3s and so on.
That's a great question. So during the research, there's a number of things that can impact different steganography techniques. So some are robust enough to survive compression, some are not. And actually, one of the things I had to do to pivot in the experiments was the background noises and environment in which you were sending a key through sound is a big factor, as well as things like compression and so forth. So to make it more robust, I actually pivoted to using a time-based one-time password in conjunction with a session key, and that made the transmission much easier and less error-prone, because for crypto material you need 100% accuracy. So yeah, so it's a good point. In the digital domain, there are many techniques objects to survive compression, but in the acoustic domain, it is actually much harder to make sure key material gets to where it needs to without interference. Thank you very much. Cheers.